St. Jude Hospital was a macabre, forgotten building that stood like a shadow in the heart of the city. Its aged concrete facade was covered in cobwebs and broken windows, and the walls seemed to defy time, retaining the dark secrets of decades past. Many believed the hospital had long been abandoned, but Emily, a young nurse with a fearless spirit, was about to discover that St. Jude Hospital held secrets that refused to be forgotten. It was a rainy autumn night when Emily's phone rang, breaking the monotonous silence of her apartment. She was about to curl up on the couch with a book, but the urgent tone in the supervisor's voice made her hesitate. The call for help was unexpected and vague, mentioning a patient needing immediate care at St. Jude Hospital. Emily, used to dealing with emergency situations, didn't think twice and quickly headed to the scene, but something about that call made her apprehensive. Upon arriving at the hospital, the metal doors creaked as they opened, revealing a dark and deserted hallway. The dim light of his flashlight illuminated the path ahead, revealing the decay of the place. As she walked cautiously, Emily felt as if the building itself was watching her, as if its walls held a dark story that yearned to be told. The nurse continued her journey through the hallways, following instructions to reach the patient's room in need. The hospital seemed frozen in time, with antique furniture covered in dusty sheets and faded portraits decorating the walls. The atmosphere was heavy, permeated with a sense of abandonment and mystery. Finally, Emily arrived at the patient's room and found an elderly man lying on the bed, his eyes empty and pale as the moon. His expression was one of agony, and he could barely speak. Emily looked through the patient's records, but they offered scant information. The patient's name was Benjamin Wainwright, and his story read like an incomplete puzzle. The only relevant information was that he had been found in the ruins of St. Jude Hospital, but details about his medical condition were vague and confusing. As Emily tried to tend to the man, he mumbled unintelligible words and shakily pointed to an old photograph on the wall. In the photo, a group of doctors and nurses were smiling, but there was something sinister in their eyes. The nurse felt a chill run down her spine, as if something beyond the image was watching her. She picked up the photograph and studied it more closely, but couldn't decipher what made it so disturbing. The night wore on, and Emily remained in the room with the patient, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong at St. Jude Hospital. The place was a labyrinth of dark secrets, and she found herself immersed in a story that was far from over. As the night wore on, the whispers from the walls seemed to increase, as if the hospital itself was trying to tell Emily its horror story. In the days following the admission of mysterious patient Benjamin Wainwright, Emily continued to care for him at St. Jude Hospital. The feeling that something was wrong with that place only increased, becoming almost palpable. The nurse, determined to uncover the truth, decided to investigate further, scouring the hospital's old files for clues. Emily noticed that the patient was repeating the name Blackwood in his delusions. It was as if he was trying to tell a story that had been silenced for decades. The name Blackwood made her uneasy, and she began searching for information on anyone with that name connected to the hospital. The nurse discovered that St. Jude Hospital had a sinister past. In the 1950s, the hospital was led by Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood, a renowned physician but also haunted by stories of cruel experiments carried out in the name of science. Reports of mistreated patients and mysterious disappearances were common at that time. Emily felt she had found a connecting thread between patient Benjamin Wainwright and Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood. They must be connected somehow, but what exactly had happened at St. Jude Hospital for Benjamin to still be tormented after so long? One night, while Emily was on duty, she heard footsteps echoing in the hospital hallways. She knew she must have been the only person in the building at that time, which made the sound even more disturbing. With a flashlight in hand, she decided to investigate. The footsteps guided her through empty, dark corridors, making her feel as if she were following an invisible presence. That was when she came across a shadowy figure, dressed entirely in white, and with a surgical mask covering his face. The figure was standing at the end of a hallway, eyes glowing with an unearthly light that cut through the darkness. Emily froze, feeling a chill run down her spine. Before she could react, the figure disappeared before her eyes, leaving her alone in the silent hallways. The terrifying encounter left Emily terrified, but also more determined to find out what was happening at St. Jude Hospital. She shared her findings with Daniel, a fellow nurse equally intrigued by the hospital's mystery. Together, Emily and Daniel began exploring the hospital's decaying hallways and abandoned rooms. They combed through piles of old files and medical records, looking for clues that might shed light on the site's dark past. What they discovered was terrifying: accounts of cruel experiments, dubious medical procedures, and stories of traumatized patients. As they delved deeper into the investigation, the cryptic whispers that echoed in the hallways seemed to come to life. The voices whispered indistinct words, as if trying to tell a story of agony and oppression. The name Blackwood was mentioned repeatedly, as if the patients' souls were trying to communicate with the living, asking for justice and redemption. Emily and Daniel began to suspect that Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood was involved in dark rituals and invocations of supernatural entities. They felt they were getting closer to a horrifying truth that the hospital had hidden for decades. One night, while exploring the abandoned hallways, Emily and Daniel heard a wailing cry coming from one of the rooms. They approached cautiously and opened the door to reveal a terrifying scene. A figure dressed in white stood before them, eyes shining with an evil light. It was the same figure that Emily had encountered before, and was ready to confront them. The atmosphere became tense and electrified as urban explorers prepared to face the unfathomable. The white-robed figure advanced toward Emily and Daniel in the dark, abandoned room of St. Jude Hospital. His eyes shone with an unearthly light, and his presence was terrifying. The atmosphere was filled with an almost unbearable tension, and fear spread like a contagious disease. Emily picked up Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood's diary that they had found in the hospital's old archive rooms. It was a worn-out notebook, full of notes and records of macabre experiments, dark rituals, and disturbing observations about patients. She began to recite the words of the liberation ritual mentioned in the diary, as Daniel accompanied her, their voices filling the space with a chilling reverberation. The candles placed on the floor flickered, and the surroundings became charged with static electricity. The white-robed figure began to writhe in pain, its movements erratic and desperate. Shadows danced around him, as if the building itself was reacting to the ritual. The hospital seemed to twitch, as if it was finally releasing a weight it had carried for decades. The words of the ritual continued to flow from Emily and Daniel's mouths, while the white-robed figure let out harrowing screams. The hallway turned into a nightmare scenario, with the voices of the haunted entities mixing with the whispers of the ritual. The tension was almost palpable, as if reality itself was unraveling. And then, with a final, agonized scream, the white-robed figure began to disintegrate into a shadowy mist. The sound was deafening, a mix of wails and screams of despair. The liberation ritual was working, forcing the entity to fall apart. Emily and Daniel continued reciting the words, determined to complete the ritual and uncover the secret that the hospital was hiding. Finally, the white-robed figure disappeared completely, and the hospital corridor returned to silence, now more oppressive than ever. Emily and Daniel looked at each other, exhausted and dazed, but also with a sense of triumph. They had faced the evil that haunted St. Jude Hospital and prevailed. With the threat removed, Emily and Daniel left the hallway where the ritual had taken place. As they walked further away from the site, they knew that the mystery of Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood and the horrors that had occurred in the bowels of the building would still haunt them. The hospital would remain a monument of horror, a silent witness to a dark past that no one would dare forget. They returned to patient Benjamin Wainwright's room, who now seemed calmer. The man's face was serene, as if the anguish that had consumed him for so long had finally dissipated. Emily took the photograph from the wall, which had previously disturbed her, and showed it to the patient. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears, as if he recognized the faces in the image. However, the nurse knew that the mystery of St. Jude Hospital was far from solved. She and Daniel, now scarred by their terrifying experiences, would carry the story with them for the rest of their lives. They had faced something most people would consider unthinkable, but the price for their curiosity was high. The white-robed figure and the supernatural entities that had inhabited the hospital were gone, but Dr. Blackwood's secret and the horrors that had occurred there would forever remain a part of the haunting stories of St. Jude Hospital. With the white-robed figure gone and the feeling of triumph in their hearts, Emily and Daniel walked out of the hallway where the liberation ritual had taken place. St. Jude Hospital, which had once seemed a maze of horror, was now immersed in an oppressive silence. The two urban explorers were exhausted, but they knew that their journey was not yet over. They headed back to patient Benjamin Wainwright's room. The man seemed calmer now, his expression serene in contrast to the agony that had consumed him for so long. Emily picked up the old photograph from the wall, the one that had once disturbed her and the patient so much. She showed the image to Benjamin, and his eyes filled with tears, as if he recognized the smiling faces in the photo. As Emily and Daniel tried to understand the connection between the patient and the image, Benjamin whispered words of gratitude, as if he was finally at peace. The room felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. However, the nurse knew that the mystery of St. Jude Hospital was far from solved. She and Daniel shared a look filled with meaning, aware that the story of Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood and the horrors that had occurred at the hospital would continue to haunt them. They wondered if, at least for that moment, the souls of the victims had found the peace they so deserved. They left Benjamin Wainwright's room and ventured through the silent halls of St. Jude Hospital, determined to leave the haunted place behind. As they approached the exit, the feeling of relief was overwhelming. They were finally free from the nightmare they had faced, but they were also carrying the weight of the disturbing revelations they had discovered. When they finally left the hospital, the night was peaceful and the fresh air was invigorating. St. Jude Hospital was behind them, but the mystery of Dr. Nathaniel Blackwood and the horrors that had occurred within its walls would forever remain in their memories. The decaying building, now silent, would continue to haunt the city as a silent witness to a dark past that no one would dare forget. Emily and Daniel knew they had survived something most people would consider unthinkable. The terrifying stories of St. Jude Hospital and their terrifying experiences were now a part of their story, a story they could never forget. As they walked away from the hospital, they shared one last look, aware that they had unlocked the place's dark secrets and faced supernatural entities that many would consider unfathomable. The mystery of St. Jude Hospital would continue to echo in their minds, like one of the most terrifying horror stories they had ever experienced.